Ambassador Zyreth Kal of the Vethrani Collective had lived for 3,000 cycles. In that time, she had witnessed the rise and fall of 17 minor species, negotiated peace between the warring Kethvor clans, and personally brokered the armistice of Silent Moons that ended the bloodiest conflict the Orion Arm had seen in 10 millennia. She thought she had seen everything the galaxy could offer. She was wrong. The first humans she ever met were refugees. 12 of them, packed into a mining vessel that should have carried 4, their ship limping into Vethrani space with its engines burning on fumes and prayers. The vessel's hull was scarred with plasma burns, and 3 of its crew members had died during the journey, their bodies stored in an emergency cargo container that the survivors had repurposed as a makeshift morgue. Zyreth Kal had ordered them brought before her out of curiosity more than anything else. The humans were not registered in any galactic database. Their homeworld, a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star at the edge of the Sagittarius Arm, had never been contacted by the collective. They were, in galactic terms, completely unknown. The leader of the refugees was a woman named Elena Vasquez. She stood before Zyreth Kal with dried blood on her face and fire in her eyes, and she told the ambassador a story. Their world had been attacked without warning. A species called the Krethvok, known to the collective as the Harvesters, had descended upon Earth with a fleet of 300 ships. The Krethvok did not conquer worlds, they consumed them. They stripped planets of resources, processed their populations for biological compounds, and left behind nothing but barren rock. Earth had not been prepared. Humanity had only just discovered faster-than-light travel, using a primitive but functional jump drive cobbled together from theoretical physics and stubborn engineering. They had no warships. They had no planetary defense grid. They had only their people, their resolve, and a few scattered mining vessels like the one Elena had used to escape. "How many survived?" Zyreth Kal had asked. Elena's voice did not waver. "We don't know. We tried to broadcast evacuation protocols, but the Krethvok jammed our communications. We managed to get maybe a few thousand off-world before." She stopped, swallowed, continued. "Before the harvesting began." Zyreth Kal felt a rare emotion stir in her chest. Pity. These creatures were doomed. The Krethvok had destroyed species far more advanced than these humans. Without a fleet, without allies, without even a home to return to, the human refugees would likely spend the rest of their short lives wandering the galaxy as beggars and outcasts. "I am sorry," Zyreth Kal said, and she meant it. "The Vethrani Collective does not involve itself in Krethvok affairs. They are too powerful, too numerous. To challenge them would mean the destruction of everything we have built." Elena stared at her for a long moment. Then she smiled, a thin, cold expression that did not reach her eyes. "We don't want you to challenge them," she said. "We just want a place to build our ships." The Galactic Council convened twice per standard cycle, bringing together representatives from the 43 member species of the known galaxy. It was a place of diplomacy, negotiation, and, very occasionally, action. Most species found it tedious but necessary, a way to maintain the delicate balance of power that kept the galaxy from descending into chaos. The Krethvok were not members of the Council. They had been invited once, many centuries ago. Their representative had eaten the collective's ambassador in the middle of negotiations and left without a word. Since then, the Council had adopted an unofficial policy regarding the Harvesters: avoid them at all costs and pray they found sufficient prey elsewhere. It was not a policy anyone was proud of, but it was practical. When Zyreth Kal first brought word of the human refugees to the Council, the response was precisely what she expected. sympathy, regret, firmly stated impossibility of intervention. "The Krethvok have claimed that sector," said Representative Moth N of the Celtic Imperium. "To harbor these refugees would be seen as an act of territorial aggression." "They are 12 individuals," Zyrith Kal pointed out. 12 survivors of a genocide. Surely. 12 today. How many tomorrow? Moth N's great, compound eyes shifted with agitation. "These humans breed quickly, Ambassador. We have seen their biological data. In a few generations, there could be thousands of them, millions. And they all remember what the Krethvok did to their world. They will want revenge. They will drag us into a war we cannot win." "We will not be dragged anywhere," rumbled High Priest Vorath of the Communion of Silent Stars. "But neither can we simply abandon them. The Communion offers sanctuary to all who seek it." "Easy for you to say," snapped Admiral Kren Tar of the Vorthak Military Council. "Your worlds are on the far side of the galaxy. The Krethvok would have to pass through a dozen territories to reach you. Some of us are not so fortunate." The debate continued for hours. In the end, a compromise was reached, though compromise was perhaps too generous a word for what amounted to organized abandonment. The humans would be granted refugee status and allowed to settle on a small, uninhabited moon in unclaimed space. They would receive no military support, no technological assistance, and no protection from Krethvok retaliation. If the harvesters came for them again, the Council would express its formal disapproval and nothing more. Zyrith Kal delivered the news to Elena Vasquez personally. She expected anger. Despair, perhaps. What she got instead was that same thin, cold smile. "It's more than we hoped for," Elena said. "A place to call our own. Room to grow. That's all we need." "You don't understand," Zyrith Kal said gently. "The Krethvok will find you eventually. They always do. And when they come—" "When they come," Elena interrupted, "we'll be ready." Zyrith Kal wanted to believe her, but she had seen the human ship, that battered, barely functional mining vessel held together with welding tape and desperation. She had seen the size of Krethvok dreadnoughts, each one capable of destroying a small moon. She knew how this story would end. The humans settled on their moon. The Council moved on to other matters. And the galaxy forgot about the strange, soft creatures from the edge of the Sagittarius Arm. For 50 years. Part 2. The Silent Builders. The first sign that something had changed came from a Celtic merchant vessel passing through the unclaimed territories. Its captain, a trader named Yeth Sho, had stopped to collect hydrogen from a gas giant and decided to take a detour past the human settlement out of curiosity. What he found made him forget about his trade routes entirely. The moon was no longer uninhabited. It was fortified. Massive orbital platforms circled it like the rings of a giant planet, each one bristling with sensor arrays and communication dishes. The surface below was covered in cities, real cities, with towering structures and atmospheric processors, and what appeared to be industrial complexes, producing things Yeth Sho couldn't identify. And the ships. Dear gods! The ships! Yeth Sho counted 17 vessels in orbit around the moon before his sensors started to glitch and fail. The human ships were unlike anything in the galactic database. They were angular, brutal things, all sharp edges and exposed armor plating. They looked like they had been designed by someone who expected to take a lot of damage and wanted to give back twice as much. When he tried to approach for a closer scan, One of the human vessels pivoted toward him with a speed that made his navigation computer scream warnings. A communication channel opened before he could even identify himself. "Celtic trading vessel, you have entered human territorial space. State your intentions." The voice was calm, professional, and utterly without fear. Yeth Sho suddenly realized that his ship, a respectable trading frigate with mild defensive capabilities, would be completely helpless against any one of the vessels surrounding him. He had made a terrible mistake. I am simply passing through," he stammered. "Trade routes. I meant no offense." A pause. Then, "You are cleared to proceed. Safe travels, Celtic vessel. And when you return to the Council, tell them we send our regards." Yeth Sho fled as fast as his engines could carry him. He did not stop until he reached Celtic space, and the first thing he did was contact Ambassador Zyrith Kell directly. "They have a fleet," he said, still shaking. "The humans, they have a fleet." The Council reconvened in emergency session. Intelligence reports were analyzed. Long-range scans were conducted. And slowly, the scope of what the humans had accomplished began to emerge. In 50 years, the original 12 refugees had grown to a population of over 2 million. Some of this was natural reproduction. Humans did indeed breed quickly, but much of it was the result of rescue operations. The humans had not forgotten about their scattered people. They had spent the first decade of their exile developing faster, more efficient jump drives, and then they had gone hunting through the galaxy, collecting every human survivor they could find. Mining crews who had been stranded on asteroid bases, research teams who had fled to distant moons, colony ships that had launched before the Krethvikakak and spent years wandering in the void. The humans had found them all, brought them home, and put them to work. And what work they had done! The human industrial capacity defied belief. They had stripped their moon of resources, then expanded to other bodies in the system. Asteroids, dwarf planets, even scooping material from the gas giants themselves. They had built shipyards in orbit, and factories on the ground, and research stations in the spaces between. They had developed new technologies at a pace that made Celtic engineers weep with envy. Improved shield generators, more powerful weapons, more efficient drives. And they had built ships, so many ships. The current estimate placed the human fleet at somewhere between 50 and 70 vessels, ranging from small frigates to massive dreadnoughts that rivaled anything in the Council's combined navies. Every single one of them was designed for one purpose: war. "This is a crisis," Admiral Kren Tar declared. "We granted them sanctuary, and they have built an army in our backyard." "They have not threatened anyone," Zyrith Kell pointed out. "Their vessels have never ventured beyond their claimed territory. Their communications have been professional and courteous." For now. But what happens when they decide to take revenge on the Krethvok? What happens when the harvesters come for them and find a fleet waiting? Do you think the Krethvok will simply shrug and retreat? No, they will escalate. They will bring their full force to bear, and anyone who has been seen as sympathetic to the humans will suffer right alongside them. "Perhaps," High Priest Vorath said slowly, "it would be wise to establish formal diplomatic relations with the humans. If we can understand their intentions, we can—" "We know their intentions!" Kren Tar slammed a manipulator limb against the council table. "They intend to fight. Everything they have built serves that purpose. They are a species consumed by vengeance." The debate raged for hours. Opinions were divided. Some saw the humans as a potential threat that needed to be contained.
Others saw them as a potential ally against the Krethvok menace. A few, like Zyrith Kal, simply wanted more information before making any decisions.
In the end, a delegation was dispatched to the human territories. Ambassador Zyrith Kal herself volunteered to lead it, partly because she was curious and partly because she felt a strange sense of responsibility for the species she had helped resettle half a century ago. She wondered if Elena Vasquez was still alive. Humans did not live as long as Vethrani, but 50 years was not beyond their natural lifespan. The human delegation that met Zyrith Kal's ship was impeccably professional. They wore military uniforms, crisp, dark fabric with silver insignia that she didn't recognize. They carried sidearms openly, though none made any threatening gestures. They escorted her through a maze of orbital platforms and security checkpoints with efficiency and courtesy. And then they brought her to Elena Vasquez. The human leader was older now, gray streaks in her dark hair, lines carved deep into her face by decades of stress and determination. But her eyes were the same. That cold fire still burned there, undimmed by time. "Ambassador Zyrith Kal," Elena said. "It's been a long time."
50 of your years, Zyrith Kal agreed. Much has changed.
Yes, it has. Elena gestured to a view screen that dominated one wall of her office. It displayed the orbital shipyards in real time, a constant dance of construction drones and partially completed vessels. We've been busy. So I see. The Council is concerned. Elena laughed, a short, bitter sound. The Council is afraid. Not of us, though. They're afraid of what we represent. They're afraid that if they get too close to us, some of that fear might rub off on them. Can you blame them? The Krethvok are not enemies to be made lightly. No, they're not. Elena turned to face her, and there was something ancient in her expression, something that had been forged in loss and hardened by decades of preparation. But they made enemies of us first, Ambassador. They came to our world uninvited. They killed our people. They tried to harvest us like cattle. We didn't choose this fight, but we're going to finish it. Zyrith Kal felt a chill run down her spine. Finish it? The Krethvok have been the dominant predator in this region of space for over 10,000 years. They have destroyed civilizations far more powerful than a bunch of refugees on a moon? Elena smiled that thin, cold smile again. You're probably right. On paper, we don't stand a chance. But here's the thing about humanity, Ambassador. We don't care about what makes sense on paper. We don't care about the odds. When something hurts us, when something threatens our people, we don't stop until it's dealt with. Not because we're brave, not because we're noble, but because we're stubborn, because we hold grudges. Because we have very, very long memories. She turned back to the view screen. The Krethvok think we're prey. They've probably already forgotten about Earth, just another meal in a long history of meals. But we remember. Every single human alive remembers. And we've spent 50 years making sure that when the time comes, the Krethvok will remember too. Part 3. The Storm Rises. The Krethvok attacks came 6 months after Zyrith Kal's diplomatic mission. It was not a surprise. Human intelligence operatives had been tracking Krethvok fleet movements for years, and they knew the Harvesters had finally noticed the growing human presence. A force of 200 ships was dispatched to cleanse the human territories and reclaim what the Krethvok saw as their rightful property. 200 ships. It was a smaller force than the one that had attacked Earth, but still overwhelming by any reasonable measure. The Council's combined navies could have fielded perhaps 500 vessels in total, and even then, a direct confrontation with the Krethvok would have been suicidal. The humans had 73 ships. When news of the approaching fleet reached the Council, there was something almost like relief in the chamber. Not satisfaction, no one wanted to see the humans destroyed, but a sense that the crisis was about to resolve itself. The humans had overreached. They had built their fleet, dreamed their dreams of vengeance, and now they would be swept away like every other species that had tried to stand against the harvesters. Ambassador Zyrith Kal felt sick. She had seen the human fleet up close. She had spoken to their engineers, their soldiers, their scientists. She had seen the determination in their eyes, not the false bravado of doomed soldiers, but the quiet confidence of people who knew exactly what they were doing. "We should send aid," she said. "At the very least, we should offer them evacuation support." "And provoke the Krethvok?" Admiral Krentar shook his head. "The humans made their choice. They will face the consequences." "This is wrong." "This is survival, Ambassador. Something the humans apparently never learned." Zyrith Kal said nothing more, but she kept her personal communications channel open to the human territories, receiving updates from Elena Vasquez's staff. If she could not help, she could at least bear witness. The Krethvok fleet arrived in the human system on a cold day in October by the human calendar. They emerged from jump space in perfect formation. 200 vessels arranged in the traditional harvester wedge, with their largest dreadnoughts at the center and screens of smaller attack craft on the flanks. Their flagship, a massive vessel called the Consuming Darkness, broadcast a message to the human territories in the Krethvok's harsh, clicking language. "Prey species, you have built where you were not permitted to build. You have bred where you were not permitted to breed. The Krethvok Consortium claims this system and all biological material within it. Surrender yourselves for processing, and we will make your end quick. Resist, and we will make your end slow." The response came not from the orbital platforms, not from the planetary defense grid, but from a single human ship that was approaching the Krethvok fleet at what seemed like a suicidal pace. It was a small vessel, barely a frigate, but its communications array was broadcasting on all frequencies, cutting through Krethvok jamming like it wasn't even there. The voice that spoke was calm, measured, and absolutely fearless. "Krethvok Consortium, this is Admiral Elena Vasquez of the United Human Navy. 50 years ago, your species attacked our homeworld without provocation. You killed billions of our people. You tried to harvest us like animals. And then you forgot about us." A pause. The small frigate continued its approach, seemingly oblivious to the weapons that were being targeted at it. "That was a mistake. We didn't forget. We remembered every face, every name, every world you've consumed. We spent 50 years preparing for this moment. And now, we're going to teach you what happens when you make enemies of humanity." On the Krethvok flagship, Commander Keth Vor laughed. It was a wet, gurgling sound, the Krethvok expression of contempt. "One ship against 200? Is this your idea of resistance, prey creature?" "One ship?" Elena's voice carried a hint of genuine amusement. "Oh, Commander, who said anything about one ship?" "They came from everywhere. They came from the asteroid fields, where they had been hidden for weeks, running on minimal power, invisible to Krethvok sensors. They came from behind the gas giants, using the massive planets as cover for their approach. They came from the dark spaces between worlds, emerging from the shadows like ghosts. 73 ships, but the Krethvok sensors suddenly registered far more than that. What is happening? Commander Keth Vor stared at his tactical display, which was rapidly filling with new contacts. Those signatures are massive. His tactical officer's voice was trembling. Commander, the human vessels, they're deploying something. Drone carriers, missile platforms, weapons systems we've never seen before. Our sensor count is now at over 300 active combatants and climbing. Impossible! But it was happening. The human fleet had brought far more than just their capital ships. They had brought automated weapons platforms, swarms of attack drones, and vast clouds of missiles that were already arming themselves and acquiring targets. The humans had been preparing for this fight for half a century, and they had built their fleet not for traditional naval engagement, but for total annihilation. The first wave of missiles hit the Krethvok flanks before the harvesters could even respond. They were not standard explosive warheads. They were something new, something human engineers had developed specifically for this enemy. Each missile carried a payload of nanomachines designed to eat through Krethvok hull material and reproduce using the consumed matter. Ships began to dissolve from the outside in. Commander Keth Vor screamed orders, trying to reorganize his fleet for a proper defense. But the humans weren't giving him time. Their capital ships were closing now, led by the massive dreadnought that served as Elena Vasquez's flagship, a vessel called the Remembrance, in honor of all the worlds the Krethvok had destroyed. The Remembrance opened fire, and the galaxy learned what fear looked like. Its main weapons weren't plasma cannons or particle beams, the standard armaments of galactic naval warfare. They were railguns, accelerating massive projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. Each shot punched through Krethvok shields like they weren't there, coring ships from bow to stern and leaving nothing but expanding debris. And the Remembrance was just the beginning. The other human dreadnoughts joined the assault, their weapons carving through the Krethvok formation with mechanical precision. Attack drones swarmed the smaller harvester vessels, overwhelming their point defense systems with sheer numbers. Missile platforms launched salvo after salvo of self-replicating nanite warheads, turning the space around the Krethvok fleet into a death zone. In the first 10 minutes of combat, the Krethvok lost 47 ships. On the Council Observation Station, a listening post hastily established at the edge of the system, Ambassador Zyrith Kal watched the battle unfold with a mixture of awe and horror. She had never seen anything like this. The Vethrani had wars in their history, ancient conflicts that were studied by scholars and remembered in memorial songs. But even the bloodiest battles of her people's past had nothing on what the humans were doing. This wasn't warfare. This was extermination. The humans moved through the Krethvok fleet like predators among prey. Ironic, given what the harvesters called them. Their coordination was flawless, their tactics unpredictable, their weapons overwhelming. Every time the Krethvok tried to adapt, the humans were already 3 steps ahead. And through it all, Admiral Vasquez's ship remained at the front of the formation. The Remembrance took hit after hit, its hull scored by plasma fire and its shields flickering under sustained assault. But it didn't retreat. It didn't slow down. It just kept advancing, pouring devastating fire into anything that came within range. "She's insane," whispered one of the Vethrani observers, a young officer who had never seen real combat. "She's going to get herself killed." Zyrith Kal shook her head slowly. "No, she's making a statement. She wants the Krethvok to see her, to know who is destroying them. This isn't just a battle for the humans. It's a reckoning. The observer stared at her. How can you be so calm about this?
Calm? Zyrith Cal laughed, and there was a note of hysteria in her voice. I'm not calm. I'm terrified. Not of the humans, of what this means. The galaxy has spent 10,000 years treating the Krithvok as an unstoppable force. And now we're watching a species that was almost annihilated 50 years ago tear them apart. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what the humans will become after this?
The young officer didn't answer. He just turned back to the view screen, watching as another Krethvok dreadnought broke apart under human fire. Part 4. The Breaking Point. Commander Keth Vor had ruled his fleet for 30 cycles. He had overseen the harvesting of a dozen worlds, commanded the destruction of 3 spacefaring species, and personally consumed the brains of over 100 sentient leaders. He was feared across 2 sectors, respected even among his own kind, and utterly certain of his place in the hierarchy of predator and prey. Now he was watching his fleet die, and he could not understand how.
They are prey, he muttered, staring at the tactical display as another cluster of his ships vanished into static. They are soft, weak. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no...
An explosion rocked the consuming darkness, and the lights flickered. His tactical officer was screaming something about hull breaches and reactor containment, but Keth Vor barely heard him. He was transfixed by the view screen, which showed a human frigate, a tiny, insignificant vessel, ramming itself directly into one of his attack cruisers. The frigate's captain had known he was going to die. He had known his ship was too damaged to survive, and instead of trying to escape, he had steered directly at the nearest enemy vessel and triggered his reactor's overload sequence. The resulting explosion took out the cruiser and 3 escort ships. "They are insane," Keth Vor whispered. "They don't care about dying." "Commander!" His first officer grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the emergency bridge. "We have to retreat. The fleet is broken. We've lost over 100 ships. If we don't jump now..." "The consortium will not forgive retreat," Keth Vor said, but his voice was hollow. "We will be hunted, consumed. Better to be consumed by our own kind than by these monsters." Monsters. Yes, that was the right word. Keth Vor looked at the view screen one more time, looked at the human fleet advancing through the debris field of his shattered armada, and he felt something he had never felt before. Fear. Not the cautious awareness that came with facing a worthy opponent, not the calculating concern of a predator encountering unfamiliar prey. This was primal, visceral terror, the instinct of a creature that knows, on a biological level, that it is facing something worse than itself. "Sound the retreat," he ordered. "All ships capable of jump, sound the retreat." Of the 200 ships that had entered the human system, fewer than 60 made it out. The rest were destroyed, some by human weapons, some by the self-replicating nanite swarms that continued to eat through hulls long after the initial missiles had impacted, and some by deliberate self-destruction when human boarding parties breached their defenses. The humans took prisoners. Not many. The Krethvok were not known for surrendering gracefully, but a few hundred survivors were captured from disabled vessels and brought aboard human ships for interrogation. The rest of the Krethvok died screaming. When it was over, Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Remembrance and looked out at the field of debris that had once been a harvester fleet. Her ship was badly damaged. Half its weapon systems were offline, its shields were gone, and nearly a quarter of its crew had been killed in the fighting. But it was still flying. They had won. "Get me a channel to the Council Observation Station," she said. Her voice was hoarse from shouting orders during the battle, but it was steady.
"Channel open, Admiral."
Ambassador Zyrith Kal, I hope you enjoyed the show. On the observation station, Zyrith Kal pressed her communication toggle with trembling fingers. Admiral Vasquez, I don't have words.
"You don't need them. Just deliver a message for me."
What message? Elena's face appeared on the view screen, older than Zyrith Kal remembered, marked by the stress of command and the satisfaction of vengeance. But her eyes were still burning with that cold fire. Tell the Council that the Kreth Vok attacked us. Tell them we defended ourselves. And tell them— She paused, and her expression hardened. Tell them this was just the beginning.
The beginning? Admiral, you've won. The Kreth Vok fleet is destroyed, surely.
Destroyed? Ambassador, this was a raiding force, a fraction of their strength. The Kreth Vok consortium spans dozens of systems. They have thousands of ships, billions of soldiers. Elena leaned forward, and the intensity of her gaze made Zyrith Kal flinch involuntarily. This battle proved we can hurt them, but it didn't finish them.
And until they're finished, until every Kreth Vok who participated in the genocide of humanity is dead, and their consortium is nothing but ash and memory, we won't stop.
You can't take on the entire consortium alone.
No, probably not. Elena smiled, and for the first time there was something almost warm in her expression. But we don't plan to be alone for long. You see, Ambassador, we've been watching the Council very carefully these past 50 years. We know which species have been raided by the Harvesters. We know which ones have lost colonies, resources, people to Kreth Vok hunger. There are a lot of grudges in this galaxy, a lot of fear. And after today, everyone is going to realize that the Kreth Vok can be hurt, that they can be beaten. She leaned back in her command chair. Fear is a funny thing, Ambassador. For 10,000 years, the Kreth Vok used it to keep the galaxy in line. But fear only works as long as you're the scariest thing in the room. And after today, I don't think the Kreth Vok hold that title anymore. Part 5. The Tide Turns. The news of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than any official communication could have carried it. Merchant vessels, diplomatic couriers, intelligence operatives, everyone had a version of the story, each one more dramatic than the last. The humans had destroyed a Kreth Vok fleet. Outnumbered nearly 3-1, they had fought and won. They had used weapons the galaxy had never seen, tactics no one had expected, and a ferocity that made even hardened military analysts uncomfortable. And they weren't done. Within weeks of the battle, human diplomats began arriving at dozens of worlds across the Orion Arm. They came with offers of alliance, trade agreements, and military cooperation. They came with detailed intelligence on Kreth Vok fleet movements, colony locations, and strategic vulnerabilities. And they came with a simple message. Join us, and we will end the Harvester threat forever. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Species that had been neutral or actively hostile toward the humans suddenly found themselves reconsidering their positions. The Celtic Imperium, which had initially dismissed the humans as a minor nuisance, opened formal diplomatic relations and began negotiations for a mutual defense pact. The Communion of Silent Stars, already sympathetic to the human cause, pledged military support and access to their extensive communication networks. Even the Vorthak Military Council, which had been among the most vocal opponents of human settlement, quietly began discussing the possibility of limited cooperation against mutual threats. And it wasn't just governments. Across the galaxy, individuals and organizations began reaching out to the humans. Scientists offered to share research. Engineers volunteered their expertise. Refugees from Krethvok attacks, species that had been consumed, scattered, nearly destroyed, emerged from hiding and pledged themselves to the human cause. The war against the harvesters was no longer a human problem. It was becoming a galactic movement. Ambassador Zyrith Kal watched it all happen with a mixture of pride and trepidation. She had been instrumental in facilitating many of the early diplomatic contacts, using her extensive network of relationships to open doors that might otherwise have remained closed. And she had spent countless hours in conversation with Admiral Vasquez and her staff, learning more about humanity and its plans. What she learned disturbed her. The humans were not simply seeking to defend themselves. They were planning an offensive, a systematic campaign to dismantle the Krethvok consortium piece by piece. They had identified key targets, military installations, breeding worlds, leadership centers. They had developed weapons specifically designed to counter Krethvok biology and technology. And they had begun training not just their own soldiers, but volunteers from a dozen other species in the brutal tactics of human warfare. "You're building an army of extermination," Zyrith Kal said during one of their meetings. "You don't want to defeat the Krethvok, you want to destroy them." Elena didn't deny it. "Yes." "Do you understand what that means? Genocide is. It's not something that can be undone. Once you start down that path." "The Krethvok started down that path 10,000 years ago," Elena interrupted. "They've consumed entire species, Ambassador, wiped civilizations out of existence, eaten sentient beings like they were nothing more than food." Her voice was hard, unyielding. "You want to talk about genocide? That's what they've been doing since before my species learned to make fire. We're just returning the favor." "Two wrongs don't make a right." "No, but this isn't about right and wrong anymore. This is about survival. The Krethvok will never stop hunting us, not as long as a single one of them is alive. We tried running, we tried hiding. Earth tried surrendering, and the harvesters ate them anyway. There's only one option left." Zyrith Kal wanted to argue. She wanted to find some diplomatic solution, some peaceful alternative that could satisfy human need for security without requiring the extinction of an entire species. But she couldn't, because deep down, she knew Elena was right. The Krethvok did not negotiate. They did not compromise. They consumed and consumed and consumed until there was nothing left. The only way to stop them was to do to them what they had done to so many others. And humanity was perfectly willing to be that instrument of destruction. Part 6. The Reckoning. The war lasted 12 years. In the beginning, it was a series of surgical strikes, human fleets hitting Krethvok installations, destroying strategic targets, and withdrawing before the harvesters could mount an effective response. The humans used their superior speed and technology to keep the enemy off balance, never giving them a chance to concentrate their forces. But as more species joined the alliance, the war began to change. What had started as a guerrilla campaign became a full-scale offensive. Fleets of dozens of ships became fleets of hundreds. Isolated raids became coordinated invasions. World after world fell to the alliance forces, each victory bringing them closer to the heart of Krethvok territory. And with each victory, the legend of humanity grew. They were called many things by many species. The Vethrani called them the Reckoning Ones, those who came to balance the scales. The Celtic called them the Cold Fire, burning with a fury that consumed all it touched. The remnants of species consumed by the Krethvok called them simply Avengers. But the Krethvok themselves had a different name. They called the humans The fear that does not stop. Because that was what the humans were. They were relentless. They were inexhaustible. No matter how many battles they fought, no matter how many losses they suffered, they kept coming. They adapted to every Krethvok tactic, countered every weapon, exploited every weakness. And they did it with a cold, methodical efficiency that terrified even their allies. There were atrocities. There were always atrocities in war. Krethvok forces massacred civilian populations on worlds they were forced to abandon. Human forces, in response, began taking fewer prisoners. Some battles ended with no survivors at all, neither side willing to offer quarter or mercy. Zirith Kal watched from the council chambers as reports came in. She saw the casualty figures, the destruction, the mounting cost of the war, and she wondered, not for the first time, if they had unleashed something that could not be controlled. But she also saw the liberated worlds. She saw species that had lived in fear for generations finally able to breathe freely. She saw the children of consumed civilizations learning about their heritage, their culture, their history, things the Krethvok had tried to erase from existence. And she saw Admiral Elena Vasquez, now aged and worn by 12 years of constant warfare, standing on the bridge of her flagship as it entered the Krethvok homeworld system for the final battle. The Battle of Krethvor Prime was the largest military engagement in galactic history. The Krethvok had concentrated everything they had left in defense of their homeworld. 3,000 ships, representing the last significant military force of the consortium, arranged in concentric defensive rings around the planet. Every station, every platform, every satellite had been armed and reinforced. The surface itself had been fortified with shield generators and weapons emplacements that made it nearly impervious to orbital bombardment. They were ready for the end, and they were determined to make the humans pay for every inch. The Alliance fleet numbered over 2,000 vessels, human ships at the core, supported by contingents from 17 different species. It was the largest military coalition in recorded history, united by a single purpose, the destruction of the Krethvok Consortium. Admiral Elena Vasquez, now 87 years old, but still commanding from the Bridge of the Remembrance, gave the order to attack. The battle raged for 3 days. Ships died by the hundreds on both sides. Entire sectors of space became debris fields, choked with wreckage and bodies. The Krethvok fought with the desperation of a species facing extinction, because that was exactly what they were facing. They knew there would be no negotiation, no surrender, no mercy. The humans had made that clear from the beginning. On the second day, the Alliance finally broke through the outer defensive rings. Human Marines boarded Krethvok stations and fought room to room, clearing them with flamethrowers and plasma grenades. Alliance fighters swarmed through the debris, hunting down isolated Krethvok vessels and destroying them before they could regroup. By the third day, the Krethvok fleet was shattered. Only a few hundred ships remained, clustered around the homeworld in a final desperate defense. And the Alliance closed in for the kill. But Admiral Vasquez ordered her fleet to hold.
"What are you doing?" demanded Admiral Krentar over the command channel. The Vorthak had committed heavily to the final campaign, and they were eager for blood. "We have them! We can end this!"
"We will end this," Elena replied, "but not with ships." She transmitted new orders to the fleet, and across 1,000 vessels, crews began to implement a plan that had been kept secret until this moment. The humans had developed a new weapon. They had been working on it for years, refining it, testing it, waiting for the right moment to deploy it. It was not a missile or a beam or a bomb. It was something far more terrible. They called it The Silence Protocol.
A swarm of modified nanites, billions upon billions of them, was released from human carrier vessels. They spread through space faster than any ship could travel, carried by specialized propulsion pods that flung them toward the Krethvok homeworld at tremendous speed.
When they reached the planet's atmosphere, they began to replicate.
The Krethvok were a hive species. Their biology was based on shared genetic material, distributed across their population through constant physical contact and exchange. It was what allowed them to coordinate so effectively, to share knowledge and experience across their entire species almost instantaneously.
The Silence Protocol exploited that connection. The nanites spread through the atmosphere, found Krethvok hosts, and began to infiltrate their nervous systems. But they didn't kill. They didn't cause pain. They simply silenced. The connection was broken. Billions of Krethvok suddenly found themselves alone for the first time in their lives. The constant background hum of their species, the shared consciousness that had united them since birth, was gone. They were individuals now, isolated, confused, afraid. And they began to die. Not from the nanites. The nanites were harmless to their bodies. But the Krethvok psychology could not survive separation. They had evolved for millions of years as a collective species. Isolation was, for them, a fate worse than death. Across the planet, Krethvok stopped fighting. They stopped eating. They stopped moving. They simply gave up. Some killed themselves. Others attacked each other in confused terror. Many just lay down and waited for the end. Within a week, the Krethvok Consortium was gone. Part 7. The Galaxy Remembers. Ambassador Zyreth Kal stood on the surface of Kreth-4 Prime 6 months after the battle. The planet had been declared a memorial world, a testament to what happened when a species chose predation over coexistence. The Krethvok cities still stood, abandoned and silent. The streets were littered with the remains of the harvesters, their bodies left where they had fallen. No one had cleaned them up. No one wanted to. Beside her, Admiral Elena Vasquez was dying. The old woman had lived long enough to see the end of the war, but her body had finally given out. The stress of 87 years, 12 of them spent in constant combat, had taken its toll. She had refused treatment, refused to be moved to a hospital ship. She wanted to see this.
Was it worth it? Zyreth Kal asked.
Elena looked at her with those cold, fierce eyes. Eyes that had seen Earth burn, had watched the Krethvok fleet break, had commanded the death of an entire species. "Ask me in 100 years," she said, "when the children of the species they consumed are flourishing, when the worlds they harvested are reborn, when the galaxy has forgotten what it was like to be afraid of the harvesters." She paused, coughing weakly. "And when humanity has become something more than we are now, something better, or something worse." She smiled, and there was something almost peaceful in her expression. "That's the thing about fear, Ambassador. It never really goes away. It just finds new things to be afraid of." Zyreth Kal didn't know what to say to that. "You've changed the galaxy forever," she finally managed. "The humans. You've become something the Council never expected. Something none of us expected." Good. The galaxy needed changing. Elena looked up at the sky, the same sky that had once watched over a species that had terrorized the Orion Arm for 10,000 years. "We're not heroes, Ambassador. We're not saviors. We're just survivors. We do what we have to do to keep going, and we don't apologize for it." She reached out and took Zyreth Kal's hand,
A gesture the Vethrani had learned was a sign of connection and trust among humans. But maybe the next species that thinks about becoming what the Krethvok were will remember what happened here. Maybe they'll think twice. Maybe they'll choose differently.
And if they don't? Elena's grip tightened.
Then humanity will be waiting. And this time, the galaxy will know to be afraid of us.
Epilogue, 1,000 years later.
The monument to the remembered stood at the heart of the galactic capital, a massive structure that rose above the cityscape like a beacon. Its surface was covered in names, billions of names, representing every individual from every species that the Krethva had consumed over 10,000 years of predation. At the base of the monument, a simple plaque read,
"They wanted us to forget. We chose to remember. And in remembering, we found the strength to become what we never knew we could be."
Humans still walked among the stars. 1,000 years had changed them. They had spread to hundreds of worlds, blended with dozens of species, become something both familiar and utterly alien to their ancestors. But the core of what they were remained. Stubborn, determined, unforgiving of those who threatened their people.
The galaxy had learned to respect that. Some feared it. Others celebrated it. But no one forgot. Because humanity's fleet had risen, and the galaxy had finally seen true fear.
Not the fear of monsters. Not the fear of predators.
The fear of something far more dangerous, a species that had learned exactly what it was capable of and was no longer afraid to show it.
The Krethvok had tried to harvest humanity. They had tried to consume them, process them, erase them from existence. And in doing so, they had created something they never expected, an enemy that would not stop, would not surrender, would not rest until justice was done. An enemy that would make the galaxy remember.
Ambassador Zyreth Kal's descendants still told the story. They told it in the same words she had used all those centuries ago.
The humans came to us as refugees, 12 of them, in a broken ship with nothing but their grief and their determination. We gave them a place to build, and they built an empire of justice. They built a fleet of vengeance. They built a legend that will last until the stars grow cold.
And they taught us something we should have known all along. The most dangerous thing in the galaxy is not a species with powerful weapons or vast fleets. It is a species that has been hurt and has chosen to hurt back.
Humanity was hurt, and the galaxy finally saw true fear.